Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. What a pleasure it is for us at the Poison Pen to spend the afternoon, at least an hour of it, with two literary legends. Dennis Lehane is our guest host, and this is a particularly good year for Dennis to be interacting with us because it's the 20th anniversary year of Mystic River. I can hardly believe that, Dennis. I can remember when you came to the store with Mystic River.
I know, it's like a blink.
No kidding.
I think everything since 2000, there's something about 2001. It was such a watershed year because of 9/11, etc. Everything seems like a blink. If you look back at it, it's just like, oh, that's 20 years ago.
Yes, in a flash, as you say. Anyway, it's a real pleasure to have you here. And this is James Lee Burke, who in 1987 wrote The Neon Rain and introduced us to Dave Robichaux. And he's been a sensation ever since. But this new book, Another Kind of Eden, is not a Robichaux book. It's in his writing about the Holland Family series. So Patrick Milliken of the Poison Pen is going to be the host, and he's going to be lurking in a blank space, but he will come back to take your questions, and Absolutely. He will put a buy link in the comments field because we still have autographed copies of Another Kind of Eden, which we're very excited about. There it is. Patrick, can you show us the signature? And there it is. So Jim, thank you very much for signing the books for us. We're so grateful.
It's my privilege.
And on that note, I'm going to retire myself and leave this afternoon to these wonderful guys. So Patrick, take over.
Absolutely. Well, it's a real treat and an honor to have both of you here with us today. You know, two of our finest writers. I'm just going to sit back and enjoy listening to you both talk. But towards the end of the program, I might pop up. I have some questions for Jim. About a year ago, we had a really wonderful conversation about the last book, The Private Cathedral. And there are some interesting themes that kind of I saw in this book as well that I'd like to kind of ask you about towards the end of the hour. But I also brought a little treat from my stash, which is an earlier Holland novel, Two for Texas. But yeah, for the meantime, I'll lurk in the background, but I'll be monitoring the comments field. So if you have questions for Dennis or Jim, go ahead and put them in and I'll reemerge towards the end of the hour. So you guys have fun.
Great. Great. How are you doing, sir?
How you doing there, Dennis?
Yeah. How are you doing? This is your day.
Where did Patrick go?
Patrick's going to hide. This is me interviewing you, I think. I think that's the plan. I think that's the plan. So how are you? Feeling good?
Oh, real fine. How about you?
Good. Good. No complaints. Loving where I'm at right now. So it's been fun. I got one more month left in your old stomping grounds. So, yeah.
Better tell people what that means.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm in New Orleans right now. I'm in New Orleans for the next month, filming a TV show. So it's been wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I love the city. There's no infrastructure. You can't drink the water. It's insanely corrupt, and I'm just in love with it. It's great.
Alec Baldwin sent me a postcard from there and said, I understand why you're so intrigued by New Orleans. It's the most beautiful city in South America I've ever visited.
That's what I feel like. That's what I feel like. It doesn't feel like the world. It's wonderful. It's so wonderful. And it's the most genuinely nice human beings I've ever met. It's like everybody accepts that they're in a lunatic asylum. It's wonderful. I wanted to talk about the new book, which I read the last 2 days. Look at this. I got from my little Garden District bookstore. I sent you a picture. I was curious, the early part of the book, the stuff that is the evocation of the kind of the early 60s and the life of a farmhand, that felt, I could be wrong, but that felt grounded in some type of autobiography. Was it? Or am I off?
Well, I was around that area in '62, and I've been around the culture of the migrant farm workers, and I appreciate what you said. because I tried to tell their story in part. And of course, the story deals with beginnings of the American agrarian movement, the national, what is it? American Farm Workers of America,
Right.
Chavez's outfit. But it also deals with an idyllic view of America, an earlier America. The original title of the book was The Pillars of Heaven, because the main character, Aaron Holland Broussard, feels that he literally has discovered America in a new way, and that it is the Garden of Eden, but he has a terrible revelation waiting for him.
Well, as did the original occupants of the Garden of Eden, right?
Well, so
but you were living around there at that time in the early 60s? You saw that world?
well, I was a caseworker out in California with migrants, and I've had some, my mother's family were ranchers and farmers, but no, I was never a farm worker. I mean, I picked tomatoes and things like that.
It was great. It was great. I really felt it. Either way, I did feel like I was on the farm in the truck with those guys, going from spot to spot. I just felt it was very evocative. It was beautiful writing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I hate when people say, where do you get your ideas? So that's not what I'm asking here, but I do think that there's always some sort of germ, there's some sort of match that goes off in us. And I'm wondering what compelled you to write this book, which is so different than, what I'm most familiar with, which is the Robichaux books. Yeah.
Well, it was a time in our lives that my wife and I and our children were migrants in one form or another. And I can say in all honesty, we did every dirty job there was, from California to Florida and every place in between. We did it. And I dedicated this book to my old compadre, Murphy Dowey. He and I were 12-string guitar partners. And he was a migrant farm worker, and he was an organizer, labor organizer too. He was one of the best people I ever knew. But anyway, I hope this story is understood. It's a rather complex one. The plot itself involves a love story. We meet a number of working people, people who have no face, the Woody Guthrie's people, the other America. But it also deals with the coming of the drug culture and some enormous social changes that were taking place in America, beginning in the year 1962, which was also the year of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
So yeah, why don't you, I would love to hear you tell, the people who are here, speak to what this story is. I feel like you can tell it a little better than I can. It's very much a stranger comes to town story. Aaron steps into a mess that's way past anything he could have planned on when he first got up into that truck and showed up on that farm. Could you tell us a little bit about that and who he meets and who his friends are and what this world is that we're in?
Well, he is around people of humble birth, as I think William Wordsworth used that term, people of humble birth. And they're working class people, but they also are in their way like poetic gypsies that drifting from one end of the continent to the other. And that's why I say they're Woody Guthrie's people. And you know the wonderful line in that ballad that he wrote Pastures of Plenty, we come with the dust and we go with the wind.
Yeah,
that's the people it's about. but they're emblematic of the characters in the Canterbury Tales. And one of them, and I worked with him, was a fella who was a ranger that went into Rome in 1943. And he told me the story, this man I worked with, and I used it in there. And it always has remained in my head. It's the perfect story about the struggle between good and evil. And this fellow, this former ranger I worked with, said, the German regular army moved northward out of Rome, but the Waffen SS went down, or some Waffen SS went down into the catacombs, and these rangers had to dig them out. And he told me, and I found out later the story was true on many levels. He said there's not one set of catacombs, there's 3 levels there. And he said these Nazis, and these are real Nazis, the Waffen SS ran the concentration camps, correct. He said they fought it out with these guys 3 levels down. And he said that the catacomb, the tunnel he was in, was partially flooded. And they had a firefight all the way across Rome until they reached a room underneath the obelisk that is in front of the Vatican. And he said in that room were the coffins that supposedly held the dust and bones of St. Paul and St. Peter. And those Waffen SS had their back to the wall. And he said he killed every one of them. He had a grease gun, one of those holding chairs. And I thought about it at the time. The rest of the city was celebrating up in the fresh air, 3 stories up, 3 catacombs up, having a grand time. And the apotheosis of American working class people who are brave and kind and good and just remarkable when it comes to a dire situation. All of it, and somehow kept inside this young paratrooper who actually was fighting with the most diabolical system the world has ever seen. And I thought at the time, I said, my God, if you told people you made this up, they wouldn't believe you. But That's it. Here is the story between good and evil, 3 stories down in stagnant water that's been there 2,000 years, and nobody knows about it. And later on in 1959, I went to Rome and I went down into the catacombs with a friar. And he told me that. He said, you can't go down, we cannot go down farther. He said the 3rd level down there is flooded with stagnant water. Wow. Yeah, quite a story.
Yeah.
A good writer is a good listener.
I was thinking too of when I was reading this that, you are known as, a writer of realistic, naturalistic fiction. That's what crime fiction is. But the books, I'm trying to think when it first showed up. I want to say 4 or 5 books in to certainly the Robichaux series, but there's always been a spiritual, is a Gothic, of course, but even a supernatural element, I think, to some of your novels. I'm thinking, is it safe to say that the beginning of it was maybe The Electric Mist was the first time I remember seeing it. And then at this point now, we've got one this feels to be the most overtly spiritual and overtly supernatural, at least in the final third of all the books you've ever written, or am I mistaken? I mean, could you speak?
No, you're right on target. Absolutely. The first, all of my books, as you say, have something of mythology or perhaps even, biblical stories, let's say, in them. But it was in the Electric Mist with Confederate Dead, where I stepped across in beyond the pale. I went out on the edge of reality,
right.
the metaphysical. And it's the story, the apparition appears, the apparition of John, General Hood, John Bell Hood.
Mhm.
It was kind of chivalric character. But yes, this one goes farther, and it includes science fiction or metafiction, people might call it, or just simply mythology. But I always like to I try to use those terms sparingly or carefully. But I've always subscribed to, number one, the belief that there's another world besides this one. And I think it's right on the other side of our fingertips. But this is what my father used to say. I talk about my father a lot because he was a very intelligent man. But he used to maintain that time was not sequential. He said all events, in all probability, in his mind at least, occur simultaneously, past, present, and the future.
Mhm.
And he said, this is what he went on to say. He said he knew that I wanted to be a writer. I was just about 15 or 16 years old. He said, Jimmy, always remember that both science and art are simply the incremental discovery of what God has already created. It's just a matter of discovery. The artist is witness to experience, not its creator. And I've always remembered that. And then he said he believed that all events occur simultaneously as a dream in the mind of God. And I've always thought that maybe my father actually saw right through the center of everything. Maybe none of that's true, but I have a feeling it is. And of course, it was Carl Jung who said that, or believed that the unconscious mind, which is 90% of the human mind, that subconscious contains buried memories. In other words, that memory is passed on through the generations. It's there. It's just a matter of discovering. It's in all of us. And I think it was Freud. It may not have been Freud. Freud had absolute contempt for novelists. I don't know if you've ever read his essay on the novelist. I mean, you want, after you read it, you feel ashamed. So I'm working my way up to low self.
No, I don't. I'm a very. I think Freud stole, half, at the very least, half of what he based everything on from novelists.
I'm glad you said that. When you're working on your self-esteem, then you read Freud.
I'll take Jung any day of the week. Any day of the week. Yeah, it's funny. I've even said this to my kids in terms of when we've had discussions about, my kids are pretty little, and whenever we have discussions about the afterlife, I always say, well, it's my belief. It's also my belief that there is no time. That time is a human construct. So if there's no time, if there truly is no time, it means that if I die, you're with me a second later in terms of time. And my father died a second ago, even though he died 10 years ago. But in terms of time, we're already all there. The end of the world's already all happened. Whatever it is, we're already there. We're already up there. So, or wherever there is. So I'm with your father on that one in terms of the lack of construct of time. I've never believed in it myself. But all right, so this is what's that?
No, I was going to say what you said applies to this book, to my book. You said it. It's all 1 second away. It's like Faulkner said, the past is not even the past, and that we remain back there 10 years ago with your father, or my father. That moment is always still there. So it never goes away. In that way, it has an eternal life. And
Joanne's father.
I think
as well.
Yeah.
There-
Pardon?
There's a character in this book who lost her father, but she's never found her father.
Oh, yeah. Joanne, and it's
Yeah.
a great character. It's a 19-year-old waitress at a Mexican restaurant. And on first glance, Aaron falls just drop dead in love with her. She's a great character.
Yeah,
She was an
sure.
artist obsessed with the Ludlow massacre and trying to give justice to those who were murdered there during the 1914 strike.
Right. And her father had what happened to her dad? I love this.
Well, her father was born blind, and the way she put it, that the only moments of illumination in his life were during his sleep. And actually, I borrowed that from a description, my own, in another book, I guess, of John Milton's struggle writing Paradise Lost. He lost his eyesight, and his only hours of illumination were in his sleep.
Yeah.
The line he used was, I wake in morning to blindness. No, I wake at morning at sunrise to darkness. That was it. I wake at sunrise to darkness.
Oh, that's good. I love that. Wow, I love that. Sunrise to darkness. So, and her dad disappeared, right? And that's something
Correct.
that, yeah, in the book, Hans.
He tried to, it was down in the West Texas plains, and there was a tornado coming across the plains, and he climbed down into a root cellar, and he was sucked out of it and disappeared. And she's been looking for him ever since. That's when we meet her. So it has many kinds of symbols. The story does, but we also eventually go into a place right at the foot of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the blood of Christ mountains. And strange things begin to happen there. So I think it's a pretty good story.
Yeah. No, it's a clear, classic coming of age story. And yet at the same time, it goes into a world that is quite, like the book of Revelations by the end. I don't know. It's pretty stunning. I wanted to talk, this is your 39th novel. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, and is that 39 in as many years, pretty much? Is that like a book a year?
Oh, no, I published my first, I published two collections of short stories also.
Right.
So my first publication was a short story when I was 19. I published a story in, it was a Western story in a college magazine. And my cousin and I, we grew up together, Andre Dubuse, whom you knew well, correct?
Yeah.
And Andre and I were only 4 months apart. We were literally raised together in Lafayette, New Iberia, and Lake Charles. And we were always each other's pacing horse. That's what he used to call me, his pacing horse. But yeah, let's see, my heavens. So that was in 1956 that I published my first story.
Wow. Wow. Sorry, I'm throwing a ball to a dog who won't behave. So but still, that's a rather prodigious, you put out a book a year every year since 1987, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's it, just pretty much.
So as a man, I've managed to publish 12 in 30 years, 12. So my question is, how do you do it? How in God's name do you keep up this pace?
Well, I work every day unless, something stops me. I mean, I can't do it physically for some reason, but that's my goal. I try to work every day, no days off. And I aim for 750 words a day. And then each morning I rewrite the 750 I wrote the previous day. And then I start the count for the current day. And that if I do that and I stay with it, I can finish just short of a year with a pretty good book.
Wow. Wow. I'm just in awe. I mean, I'm incapable of that. Sometimes I get 100 words in a day. Very exciting for me. So another thing I was thinking of is that Aaron, Aaron has a lot of pressures coming in on him. He has both the external pressures, which is the Vickers, this sleazy college professor named Henri DeVos. And he also has, there's a shocking revelation midway through the book from a seemingly good character. So that was the pressure from without, which is usually what a novel is. But then there's the pressure from within, which to me is that he's going through a lot of inner turmoil, that a lot of it's chemical, that he was born and has been diagnosed with a type of schizophrenia. He says alcoholism runs in his family, so he had a bout with alcoholism and stopped it at a very young age. So I guess I'm wondering, how much of what was the intention with creating Aaron? Because he feels very original and unique in that regard, in terms of his demons.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's a true artist, I think. And he tells us about the attempts he's made to find some kind of solace in life, because he's paid some pretty heavy dues. He comes from a family that has a great deal of violence in it, but he despises violence. But nonetheless, he has a record behind him that he denies. Namely, I don't want to give away the story, but
No.
he knows something about people at their worst, and sometimes maybe at their best, but he never talks about it with anyone. Secondly, he has memory lapses and blackouts that are non-chemically induced. Also, he's been the psychiatrist numerous times and has been diagnosed as what is called, multiple personalities, dissociative personality disorder. It's
right.
And he has several people living inside of it. I always like to ask people if they've ever had questions like this with a psychiatrist. The first question, a diagnostic question a psychiatrist asks the patient is, do you ever hear people talking in your head? Do you hear sounds in your head? And I learned through experience, do not tell the truth. Deny it right away, because you'll be in electroshock therapy by the end of the day.
Really?
Or a straitjacket, because it's a symptom of schizophrenia. But all writers have voices in their heads. I compare it with a marching brass band. What is it? The Mormon Tabernacle Choir blasting away. But every writer knows this, that in the unconscious is a zoo. They're gargoyles running around in it. You tell this to a clinician, he'll have you lobotomized.
Or just tell them to back off, man. Let me stay in my territory. I agree. No, I agree, because the idea of the us hearing not voices saying, go go rob a bank, but voices of other people. This is how we get our characters. That's why the questions of like, where do you get your ideas, is such a silly question. It's just like, what do you mean? You know, the ideas are flowing in, you know, at like friggin' trains going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth all day, all night. Then you're sleeping and you get more of them. You know, that's just the beast. That's just what it is to be a writer. You know, so, but I don't know. Do you think that's akin to schizophrenia, or it just seems like on the surface it would be?
Yeah, it's not related to schizophrenia, though.
No.
Hemingway told a story once. He said a psychiatrist asked him once if he had ever been in analysis, and Hemingway said, "Oh yeah, every day with Dr. Smith Corona."
Yeah, that's the truth. That's the truth.
I knew his brother well. Yeah.
Yeah. I get one of the things I get all the time is, I expected you to be so dark, you know? And I'm like, that's for the books. It's not me. It's for the books. The part of me that needs to go dark goes into the books. That's my therapy, you know? The rest of me is just a, you know, idiot who wants to sit around watching football and Marx Brothers movies. I mean, that's not, you know, that's not particularly dark. So another thing I'm just curious about, because now you've got such a legacy, a body of work behind you that is, you know, in my opinion, pretty staggering and almost unparalleled right now. What, if you had a moment, what do you think, what are your favorite, not necessarily your best or not, but what are your favorite books of yours?
The ones that I think are best are the trilogy, the Holland trilogy. I wrote actually 2 Holland trilogies, but the last one was A Wayfaring Stranger, The House of the Rising Sun, and The Jealous Kind.
Yeah.
And The Jealous Kind was narrated by the same man, Aaron Holland Broussard, who narrates Another Kind of
Eden. Yep.
Yeah, but those 3 are my best.
Really? So Jealous Kind was
no question about it.
So Aaron is older in Jealous Kind.
No, he's in high school.
Oh, he's in high school.
Narrates the story in Galveston and Houston.
Got it. Okay.
And it's quite a book. And Wayfaring Stranger takes place in the war years. It starts in the Depression, goes through the war years. I said this to someone else the other day. I'll repeat it without being, I think, vain. I don't say that I deserve the Pulitzer Prize. I do not say that. But the book Wayfaring Stranger deserved the Pulitzer Prize. It is
good for you.
Great. Yeah.
For you.
That's
wonderful. Okay.
Wayfaring Stranger.
That's a note to everybody who's listening. You know, favorite book. Should have been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. Wayfaring Stranger on top of Another Kind of Eden. You guys are buying 2 books today. All right. So what is, and then I'm going to hand this over to Patrick, I think. Have you begun any work on the next one yet?
Yeah, I've finished it. It's a sequel to this book. It's a standalone book. But, its title is Every Cloak Rolled in Blood. Every Cloak Rolled in Blood. It's from the Bible. I hate to say how many times I've taken things from the Bible. I'm always afraid I'm going to be in trouble down the road.
Why? I don't think anybody minds.
There's somebody saying, "We've been waiting for you."
We want our titles back? What is it?
There's no copyright on the Bible.
I know. Come on. Some of the best lines in that book.
Red book in the history of Humankind.
Humankind. Yeah. Well, that's Patrick. I was gonna swing you back in if you would. Yeah, there you are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I feel like I've exhausted the things on my mind.
Okay. Yeah. Well, just to kind of further up on you brought up most of the stuff I was going to talk about, but there's so much going on in this book. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, Jim, about some of the, I guess, what you would consider secondary characters, which I thought were so fantastic, especially Cotton. Cotton and Spud. Just great characters. Can you talk about Cotton's role in this book? It seems like it's a pretty major one.
Well, he's the former ranger, paratrooper, who tells the story about shooting the Nazis underneath the down under with the catacombs. He also is always reading classic comic books, and it was my maybe left-handed way of indicating that. Like Wordsworth said, that people of humble backgrounds sometimes represent the best in us. And he's a chivalric figure, that he represents everything that's good in human beings. He only has one eye. So when Aaron is looking at him, it seems as though Cotton has a division in himself, that one eye has a coloring like the skin on a hard-boiled egg. I think that's how Aaron describes it. But he's a fine man, but he's also a fellow that people don't fool with. And our friend Spud, who is Spud Caudle, is his name, is a boy that left home, ran away when he was 11 years old in Kentucky. And he's a fine fellow, though. But that has always been my experience. Pearl and I and our little boy lived in a village in the mountains, way back in Jalisco, deep down in old Mexico. Dangerous place. People still wore guns. Soldiers sat with M1s on the rural bus there because banditos would often rob it. But the people there, the people that worked in those corporate farms down there, they glowed with something. It's like blue light, blue fire, that they were holy people. With I never got over it. You look in their faces. I got to turn this off. Hang on, sorry. Golly, sorry. Hang on. Does anybody out there want this phone? Golly, do you ever have these things? They're junk. Oh, geez. We have 5 in our house, and I think they walk around at night and figure out ways to mess up my life. Anyway, I'm going to throw it in the commode in a bit. Well, anyway, the farm workers in Mexico, I just think they're holy people.
Yeah, there was I'll just look at some questions here, but before I get to those, you were talking a little bit about the Joanne McDuffie character, who I thought also was a fantastic character. And, both Joanne and Aaron seem to kind of view the world through an artistic lens in the book. And in the previous novel that we talked about last year, I don't know if I have a question formulated here, but a big part of it was about the dark night of the soul, that whole theme. And it seems to me that in a way, Aaron hasn't quite gotten to his private cathedral yet. I don't know if you have any comments on that, or he's on the road.
Well, he's been through it. No, he's the long night of the soul, I think it's called. Sometimes analysts use the term, excuse me, a Gethsemane experience. And that's when a person actually sweats blood. It's that bad. Yeah, it's bad. Yeah. People are never the same. They come out of it on the other end. I mean, most of them, they'll come out on the other end, but they're never the same. And Aaron describes that. He said, the average, no, it's Aaron in the next book describes it, the sequel. He says that an ordinary experience, we're talking about it, is, makes him fall asleep, that ordinary conversation does. That he has no anger, no grudge with the world, that he fears nothing. That's the payoff, but it's a rough one.
And also,
it used to be treated with lobotomy. Years ago, it was treated with lobotomies.
right.
But he's been through it, yeah.
One thing I'm not sure, Dennis, did you know that one of Jim's early mentors was the wonderful writer John Nihart? And I asked Jim about that last year, and we got into a real interesting discussion about it. Do you mind just saying a few words about Nihart and how he influenced you?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. He had a tremendous influence on me, and as most people know, he's the man who wrote Black Elk Speaks, and he knew Black Elk, who was a mystic, a clairvoyant, and a shaman with Sitting Bull's tribe. And he was a very old gentleman when he was my poetry teacher at the University of Missouri in 1957. And I learned a world of things from him. And he gave me great, he gave me the faith to stay with it. No, I can't put it that way. I would never quit writing. I never even thought about it. But he made me understand something about what art is all about. And he said, as soon as you become an artist of any kind, he said, you make a contract with some spiritual influence outside yourself. And then he told me, he said he only wrote at night because that was when the voices of dead poets spoke to him. And he was a mystic. And I could tell you some really, really strange stories about mystical things that happened at his farmhouse. I knew him very well. So did my wife, Pearl. We used to go fishing at a lake on his wheat farm outside of Columbia, Missouri. But he was one of the great voices of the epic West. My own feeling about the literary West is that John Nihart and A.B. Guthrie invented it. They invented the American West. They turned it into an epic. It's Homeric, but it's those two men who are responsible. They saw Homer at work. They didn't create it. They saw it when others did not.
One of the
things, how he put. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm sure Dennis noticed this too, but one of the things that I've noticed about a lot of your work is this kind of, it seems like it's almost a classical device of at the very beginning, kind of starting in the we voice, introducing the story. Can you talk about that at all?
Well, it's a little bit like, again, what John Nihart was telling me. He said the story of the West is not really the story of the West. He said the civilization follows the sun. And he said the story of the American West is the story of mankind. And he said, you never forget that. And he said that the great artist will be a black silhouette against a red sun somewhere in California, somewhere in his life. That'll happen to him. And he said, Jim, don't ever give up your talent. He told me another thing. I was 21 years old when he was telling me these things. I spent a lot of time with him. He said, I asked him, I said, do you think really I can write poems? He said, Jim, you have a handful of jewels in your hand, and you seem to throw them across the top of the table, but you haven't learned form yet, F-O-R-M. And he said, I don't know that you should.
And then,
That was a compliment. It meant, even though you should learn how to write a Petrarchan sonnet, don't mess up your work.
yeah, he seemed like a real larger than life character,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
just reading about him, seeing photographs and things. And,
Yeah.
you know, you realize our link to that world is, you know, as Dennis was just saying, just a second, you know.
He was friends with Buffalo Bill Cody. He showed me the Peacemaker revolver that Bill Cody gave him. He was a member of the Greenwich Village Poets in 1905 and my teacher, and I'm still around in 221. And the past is not the past. It's right, blink, just right over your shoulder.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see. And then before we kind of wrap it up here, you mentioned, you know, the Holland family, the overall Holland family saga that you've really been writing about from the very beginning. But can you also say a few words about that? I don't think it got as much attention as it deserved, that Civil War novel, White Doves at Morning. I thought that was a tremendous novel.
Thank you. That's one of my best books. And it just seemed, for whatever reason, it didn't catch on, but it's a fine story about the war between the states and the Battle of Shiloh. It's based on my great uncle's experience there.
Well, a few of the questions.
Did you ever see the film or read the short story by Ambrose Bierce titled An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge?
Sure.
That's where my great uncle Willie Burke was. His outfit was wiped out there. Owl Creek was on the left flank of General Beauregard's line. They got cut to pieces, 40% casualties in 15 minutes. They were ordered to attack uphill into Union Cannon. They were, it was just a massacre. But anyway, all of that's in that book, but nobody read it.
I have a question from a gentleman named Marco who says, did Mr. Burke ever get a chance to meet Dolores Huerta?
Oh, I knew, I met, rather than, I don't want to talk about my own experience. I met other members of the different places, people who were involved in the unions.
Right. And just let's see, a question for Dennis. The Inevitable. Do you have a new book coming out, or are you working on something right now?
I am. I do have a book. It's very strange because I've been working nonstop on running a TV show, but somehow for my own sanity, I've been scribbling and to keep, I don't know, I needed to split my brain. So yes, I have a book that I think I'll deliver at the end of the year. And it's set in 1974 in South Boston during the busing crisis, the federal desegregation of the Boston public schools. And yeah, it's going to be a very kind of stripped down, primal novel about a woman trying to figure out what happened to her only child, who disappears at the sort of 1974. Boston's 9 years old, and I have very vivid memories as the city kind of tore itself apart. And that's what I'm going to be writing about, is that 1 month in which everybody was ordered to switch schools and people just went crazy. So
Patrick, before you, I know Dennis has to go to another engagement, but I wanted to, it occurred to me, Dennis, that in all the years I've known you, I have never asked you this question. And it's always kind of been in the back of my mind, because I remember sitting and staring for months at the advanced reading copy of A Drink Before the War. And the entire time I was convinced that it was a war novel for some reason. And
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, I
Try to
didn't,
talk me out of that title. Yeah.
right. Well, eventually when I read it, I was able to push the Seamus committee to look at it. But my question is, why did you call it A Drink Before the War? I don't know why it's never occurred to me to ask you that.
Well, the line is in the book. It's in the book. He says, "I'll buy a drink before the war" at one point. But it was because I was listening to a Sinead O'Connor album and over and over and over and over when I wrote it. And there was a song on there called A Drink Before the War. I just thought
So there I've tortured myself for years, but it was a relatively easy answer.
Yeah, but just took it, you know.
Well, thank you, Dennis, so much for joining us.
Guys, thank you guys. I'm sorry I got to jump. Jim, this was a real pleasure. It was a real honor to be able to talk to you about your latest. So I'll be in touch.
But thank you for taking the time out. I know you're busy.
Oh, it's my honor. My honor. It was wonderful. So I hope the book does gangbusters, as I'm sure it will.
But
So,
thank
Jim,
you for being here.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Here,
Thank you,
Dennis. Great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too, Patrick. Bye, Barbara.
Bye.
Bye.
And Patrick and Barbara, thank you for hosting the.
Well, we're not
event that
quite
you-
done yet, Jim. I wanted to ask you a similar
Okay.
question because
Okay.
whenever anybody asks me for my very favorite title for a book, I have always answered, since you wrote it, In the Electric Mist with the Confederate Dead. I mean, that is just an
Wow.
unbelievable book title. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Dennis, is where did the title come from?
It's from a bluegrass song, a very old one. And I forget the rest of the lyrics, but let's see, White Doves at Morning. It has to do with a dirge, really, and mourning of mourning the dead. But it's the kind of, I think, that Ralph Stanley would sing, but I think maybe he did sing it, but I don't remember. Ralph Stanley, you know, had a very sonorous voice, but boy, when he sang about morbid subjects, golly, you really could feel the pall.
Well, it's a magical title, but I always wondered too, did you meet some resistance from your publisher? It's not the sort of title that normally publishers are excited to have on the cover of a book because it's so long.
No, it's just from a song that I heard.
Got it. All right, Patrick, I'm going to go away again and leave you to ask Jim
Yep.
any other questions that you've got.
All right. Sounds good. Well, Jim, yeah, I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Oh, you're not.
We sure appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us. And how is the lovely Pearl? Is she doing okay?
Well, we've had some bad fortune. She's been she was in an accident, but we're
Right.
we're hoping she can come home soon.
Good. Glad to hear that. Well, I will, I'm just looking to see if there's any other final questions. I know your work ethic is so incredible. Do you already have a finished manuscript done for next year?
I do. Yeah, it's supposed to be out in May.
Is there anything you can tell us about it?
Well, it's the one I mentioned, Every Cloak Rolled in Blood, and it's
Oh.
a sequel to this book, Another Kind of Heat.
Fantastic. How's your guitar picking going? Been playing any guitar?
Oh, I've been playing more than a half century, and I'm still working on The Wild Side of Life. That's, you know, written by Jimmy, or sung or played or written by Jimmy Heap. That was his name, Jimmy Heap. It is the backbone, the glue, the power of country music back as far as country people were playing music. I don't know. Somebody else said that, Johnny Cash, I believe, something in the Southern gene pool, that every Southerner understands that song. It comes from the spiritual song, The Great Speckled Bird. I'm kidding. It's the song that every country singer or player can perform except me. I'm still working on it.
Fantastic. Well, Jim, again, much appreciation. Thanks for taking the time out to speak with us today. And here's everybody. Here's the brand new book, Another Kind of Eden. We still have a handful of signed copies left. I went ahead and put the link in there if you'd like to purchase one. But have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, Jim. Always great to see you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on board. I surely appreciate it.
You bet.